Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Occult Think Tank. My name is Greg. In today's program, I am going to be talking about the Ebens, the extraterrestrials known as the Greys. This report is coming from the Yellow Book, and my commentary on it will be at the end. The Ebens. So, who are these Ebens? I guess you could say their technical name is EBs. Our government referred to them as extraterrestrial biological entities, EBEs. But they call themselves Ebens. The Ebens are from the Zeta Reticuli twin star system, Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, and are near twin. Fifth magnitude yellow star, which are 38.42 light years away. In one instance, the Ebens claim it takes them 91 days to reach Earth from their planet, and another time they claimed it took 9 months. They have space travel capabilities and can venture through space, defying the time barrier. The official Defense Intelligence Agency designation of their planet is Ebens Planet Serpo, DIA designation DIALP-0916, Star System Zeta Reticuli. DIALP stands for Defense Intelligence Agency Life Planet. Evidence gleaned from both Betty and Barney Hill abduction case and from other intelligence sources has suggested that the home of at least one group of alien visitors to Earth may well be Zeta Reticuli system. The Ebens planet is similar to Earth, but the air is a bit thinner and contains a higher proportion of argon and helium. Also, the average temperature is a bit cooler, especially in the northern part of their planet. They like our high mountain regions where the air is thinner and the temperature is cooler. They can't stand a lot of heat. Maybe this explains the number of alien underground bases in places like Mount Shasta, Siberia, and the Himalayas. These Ebens are creatures about 3 foot 4 inches to 3 foot 8 inches tall. Their eyes are extremely large, almost insect style, with a couple of different inner lids. Their skin structure is very elastic and hard, probably hardened from their sun. Facts on the Ebens revealed by retired U.S. government employee in 2005. He claims, "I won't go into any great detail about my past, but I was involved in a special program. As for Roswell, it occurred, but not like the storybooks tell. There were 2 crash sites, one southwest of Corona, New Mexico, and the second site at Pelona Peak, south of Dayton, New Mexico. The crash involved 2 extraterrestrial craft. The Corona site was found a day later by an archaeological team. This team reported the crash site to the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department, and a deputy arrived the next day and summoned a state police officer. Only one live entity, EBE, was found hiding behind a rock. The entity was given water but declined food. The entity was later transferred to Los Alamos. The information went to Roswell Army Airfield. The site was examined and all evidence was removed. The bodies were taken to Los Alamos National Laboratory because they had a freezing system that allowed the bodies to remain frozen for research. The craft was taken to Roswell, then to Wright Field, Ohio. The second site was not discovered until August 1949 by 2 ranchers. They reported their findings several days later to the sheriff of Catron County, New Mexico, because of the remote location. It took the sheriff several days to make his way to the crash site. Once at the site, the sheriff took photographs, then drove back to Dayton. Sandia Army Base, Albuquerque, New Mexico, was then notified. A recovery team from Sandia took custody of all evidence, including 6 bodies. The bodies were taken to Sandia Base, but later transferred to Los Alamos. The live entity established communications with us and provided us with a location of his home planet. The entity remained alive until 1952 when he died. But before his death, he provided us with a full explanation of the items found inside the 2 crafts. One of the items was a communication device. The entity was allowed to make contact with his planet. Somehow, I never knew this information, but a meeting date was set for in April 1964 near Alamogordo, New Mexico. The aliens landed and retrieved the bodies of their dead comrades. Information was exchanged. Communication was in English. The aliens had a translation device. In 1965, we had an exchange program with aliens. We carefully selected 12 military personnel, 10 men and 2 women. They were trained and vetted and carefully removed from the military system. The 12 were skilled in various specialties. Near the northern part of Nevada test site, the aliens landed and the 12 Americans left. One entity was left on Earth. The original plan was for our 12 people to stay 10 years, then return to Earth. But something went wrong. The 12 remained until 1978. 8 returned, 2 having died on Serpo, and 2 having chosen to remain, according to the returnees. Of the 8 that returned, all have died. The last survivor died in 2002. The returnees were isolated from 1978 until 1984 at various military installations. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI, was responsible for their security and safety. AFOSI also conducted debriefing sessions with the returnees. Why the Ebens came to Earth. The Ebens claim that when they first came to Earth, they were involved in the genetic experimentation of Earth humans and used alien biogenetic engineering to create present-day Homo sapiens. These Ebens then left, and there is some confusion as to how often they returned. There is mention about returning 2,000 years ago, and we know that they returned in the early 40s, setting up a base in northern New Mexico. In 1947, 2 of their spacecraft crashed in southern New Mexico. We discovered them, and this began a fascinating relationship with the Ebens. Alien hybrid genetically altered aliens related to the Ebens. It gets complicated when you try to compare these genetically altered creatures. The Ebens have created several different breeds of genetically altered creatures. The herpaloids have also created several different genetically altered creatures. Some are hybrid mixtures. That's why it is so complicated to try and fully understand all the different alien races. It gets even more complicated than that. Not only have the Ebens created a hybrid race, which are gray in color, but the Tantalloids also created a gray race of hybrids. EB number 1, number 2, and number 3. EB number 1 was found in the Roswell crash near Corona, New Mexico. He was slightly hurt and quickly recovered from his wounds. He was a mechanic. He was able to communicate through pictures with Army personnel. They placed him in an isolation room at Roswell Army Airfield. Then, in September 1947, he was transferred to Kirkland Field and was again isolated in a medical unit. During this time, EBE number 1 worked with top military linguists. They were able to communicate with him by showing him photographs. They later developed symbols to communicate words. In linguistics, these are known as logograms or logographs. Eventually, EBE number 1 was able to utilize these symbols and communicate his wants and needs. He was able to eat simple foods such as bread, fruits, pasta, salads, and cheese. However, meats caused him problems, and he would vomit the meats. He was examined by numerous medical doctors and scientists. They took skin samples and examined his body fluids and conducted x-rays on him. They found that he had one primary organ that worked as his heart and lungs. That was a combined organ. He had a simple digestion system. One organ worked as a stomach, and one other organ worked as his intestines. They could find no liver, pancreas, or gallbladder. Apparently, EBE number 1's stomach acted as all of these organs, or he just didn't need them. He had small glands on his hands, arms, and legs. His glands would enlarge at certain times. Scientists could not figure out what these glands were for, nor their use. EBE number 1 measured 4 foot 3 inches tall and weighed 60 pounds. His weight never varied. However, his height did. During the winter months, his height would increase by about 1 inch. His body generated heat by some means that our scientists could not determine. He wore a tight-fitting one-piece suit. That suit was all he needed to maintain his correct body heat. This suit was made of an elastic material that retained warmth and kept out cold. His body temperature of 101 degrees almost never varied. He was provided with a blanket but rarely used it. His blood was red and contained similar cells to humans, such as red and white blood cells. His blood also contained numerous things our scientists couldn't identify. His body did not require a large quantity of water or fluids. He was able to extract the fluids required to maintain his proper levels through the breakdown of food. His body was able to somehow determine the correct amount of fluids required and eliminate the remaining unused fluids. It was determined that eating was not a pleasurable activity for him, but rather just a necessity. EBE number 1 was always calm, kind, and very considerate. He never got excited, rude, nor was mean-spirited. He was very social, even though he couldn't understand others around him. He liked to touch people and learned that holding a human hand was a common social practice. He was very docile, even when scientists were poking and examining him. He seemed to understand as he just let them go about their business. He was always willing to communicate or attempted to communicate. He quickly learned the symbol system and eventually learned our language in a very simple way. In 1950, EBE number 1 was moved to a special facility created for him at Los Alamos National Laboratory. He lived in a little 3-room apartment. His handler, who was assigned to him in 1949, joined him and lived with him in the apartment. They became such great companions that neither wanted to separate. It was found that he could not speak our language because of a lack of vocal cords in his throat. The Ebens communicated via tonal inflections amongst themselves. A brilliant doctor developed a device that was implanted into EBE-1's throat, which allowed him to speak English, although crude. He was able to speak simple sentences and eventually communicate through English to his handler. During the entire time EBE number 1 was alive, he had medical problems. He developed a rash on his body that irritated him. Several different medicines were tried and eventually the rash went away. He developed a cough that seemed to be connected to a food allergy. They found that certain fruits would cause the cough. Eventually the cough subsided, but he was left with a sore throat. EBE number 1 was shown the items recovered in the Roswell crash site. He was able to teach us how to utilize the communication and energy devices. We also found a medical kit which contained small injectable tubes. He didn't know what each item was for, but he explained that they were for injuries. Scientists experimented and determined that each tube contained a chemical substance. Not knowing what they were for, they were cautious not to use them on him for fear that they would do more harm than good. No rescue mission was able to be launched for EBE number 1 because the only 2 Eben crafts that were near Earth crashed. He did say that they sent a distress signal to planet Serpo, but it would take at least 9 months for the nearest rescue craft to reach them. He died in 1952 at Los Alamos, and his body, along with those of his crewmates, were returned to the Ebens in 1964 during the meeting in New Mexico. The Eben craft was stored in Ohio, then moved to Nevada. It is believed to be at the Nevada test site. EBE number 1 and the communication device. EBE number 1 provided a communication device that allowed us to contact planet Serpo. This communication device was on board the Eben craft that crashed in July 1947 near Corona, New Mexico. EBE number 1 showed us the proper use of this communication device prior to his death. However, the device did not function properly, and no contact could be made with planet Serpo. Just prior to EBE number 1's death, an American scientist from Los Alamos figured out how the device worked and connected an energy source found in the Ebens craft to the communication device. With EBE number 1's assistance and language input, several signals were sent during the summer of 1952. In early fall of 1952, we received several signals on the device. EBE number 1 translated the message and provided us with the information. EBE number 1 sent 6 messages. The first message was just letting his planet know he was alive. The second message explained the crash in 1947 and the death of his crew. The third message asked for a rescue craft for him. The fourth message suggested a formal meeting with leaders of Earth. The fifth message suggested an exchange program. Note, it is believed, but not documented, that EBE number 1's U.S. military caretaker had suggested to EBE number 1 that an exchange program be set up which would allow our people to visit and exchange culture, scientific information, and collect astronomical information during the space trip by an American military team, or what eventually became known as the Team Members. The sixth message provided landing coordinates for any future rescue or visitation mission to Earth. The incoming messages gave a time and date. the Eben date and time system and confirmed a landing location. However, once the message was translated by EBE number 1, it was determined that the date was over 10 years away. Fearing that EBE number 1, who was sick at this point, did not translate the message correctly, our scientists began to translate the message based on the Eben language that was taught to us by EBE number 1. Note, EBE number 1 was a mechanic, not a scientist. He was still able to teach us some of the Eben language. It was documented that we translated about 30% of the Eben language. Complex sentences and numbers could not be recognized. EBE number 1 assisted us as long as he was alive, but once he died, then we were on our own. We sent several messages over a 6-month period, 1953, but we did not receive any return messages. We fine-tuned our efforts over the next 18 months and finally sent 2 messages in 1955 and received a reply. We were able to translate about 30% of the messages. We turned to several linguist specialists from several U.S. universities and even several from foreign universities. Finally, we were able to translate most of the messages. We decided to reply in English and see if the Ebens could translate our language easier than we could theirs. Approximately 4 months later, we received a reply in broken English. Sentences that contained nouns, adjectives, but no verbs. It took us several months to translate the messages. We then sent Eben our typed English lessons. 6 months later, we received another English message. This time it was clearer, but not clear enough. The Ebens were confusing several different English words and still failed to complete a proper sentence. But we were able to provide the basic skill level for them to communicate in English. In one message, they provided us with a form of the Eben alphabet with the equivalent English letter. Our linguist specialist had a very difficult time figuring this out. The written Eben language was simple characters and symbols, but our linguist specialist had an extremely difficult time comparing the 2 written languages. Over the next 5 years, we were able to perfect our understanding of the Eben language somewhat, and the Ebens were able to better understand English. However, we had a major problem trying to coordinate a date and time location for the Eben landing on Earth. Even though we could basically understand some of Eben and Ebens could understand some English, we could not understand their time and date system, and they could not understand ours. We sent them Earth's rotation schedule, revolution, date system, etc. For some reason, the Ebens never understood this. In return, the Ebens sent us their system, which was difficult for our scientists to understand because we had no reference to their planet. The Ebens did not explain any astronomical data of the planet Serpo or their system. We then decided to just send pictures showing the Earth's landmarks and a simple numbering system for time periods. The Ebens sent back a message which indicating they would return to Earth on a particular number, date, and location that we chose. The date was April 24th, 1964, and the location was in the southern sector of White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico. EBE number 2, 1964 to 1984. Came as part of an exchange program from the third planet of Zeta 1 and resided in a Los Alamos safe house. EBE number 3 was a female that arrived in 1978 and left in either 1989 or 1993. Reagan supposedly had meetings with 2 of the EBs. The escaped alien Area 51 Gate 3 incident. This version is from a reliable source. There was some discussion of an incident known as Gate 3, in which a cloned biological entity escaped a containment area in Area 51 and was subsequently shot after the entity pulverized a guard. It was claimed that there are still classified portions of this incident that have not been released. First of all, the weapon used by the CBE, cloned biological entity, was stolen from a research laboratory room. The weapon was an energy-directed device, EDD, which was given to us by the Ebens. The EDD was in a locked container inside the S2 research room. An extensive investigation disclosed that J-Rod had obtained the weapon, unlocked the CBE's room, and gave the CBE the weapon. Why? J-Rod wanted the CBE to protect himself. The EDD could be set for stun, similar to present-day taser, or the kill mode. J-Rod wanted the EBE to escape and be free. J-Rod realized that he could never be free since he had a duty and obligation to stay. J-Rod was extremely dedicated, but apparently didn't feel the CBE needed to be contained. And here's the official version. Gate 3 incident. Date. This incident occurred in April of 1983. Background. Gate 3 was a designation for an entrance into the Groom Lake complex. This gate connected to the Groom Lake complex with Area 51. The gates surrounding the Groom Lake complex were the responsibility of a private security company, Wackenhut Corporation. There was a mixture of private security and military security for the complex. Event. The incident occurred when a visitor extraterrestrial entity, ETE, being housed at Area 51 S2 facility escaped. A massive search was started by military and private security forces. The visitor was on foot and left the underground S2 facility through an open vault door. Narrative. Part of the search team was the director of the security for Groom Lake Complex and an agent from the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, AFOSI, who was the counterintelligence officer for the complex. Both were traveling in a Jeep from the back gate of Groom Lake to the gate leading into Area 51 called Gate 3. As the Jeep approached Gate 3, the OSI agent noticed the guard was missing from the required location outside the gatehouse. As the Jeep stopped, the OSI agent got out of the Jeep to investigate. Critical mass. The OSI agent walked up to the gate to check on the guard. As the OSI agent got closer to the front door of the gate, the OSI agent noticed the interior of the gate was blood splattered. The OSI agent noticed only a small pieces of human body parts were left of a human being. The OSI agent returned to the Jeep and contacted Central Security Control, main/primary security office for the complex, and reported the findings. The director of security contacted his office by way of a radio phone mounted inside the Jeep. The OSI agent, armed with only an automatic pistol, walked around the area searching for a perpetrator. Flashpoint. The OSI agent located the visitor lying down near an underground water culvert. The OSI agent challenged the visitor, ordering the visitor to give up. The visitor walked away, followed by the OSI agent. At some point, the OSI agent fired his weapon at the visitor as a warning. The visitor turned and pointed something at the OSI agent. The OSI agent fired directly at the visitor, hitting the visitor directly in the chest with 2 rounds from a .45 caliber automatic pistol. The visitor fell to the ground. It took about 18 minutes for additional security forces to arrive. The visitor was placed inside a containment chamber and transported back to the S2 facility. The visitor recovered from his wounds. Follow-up. The incident was investigated by the FBI and the Air Force of Special Investigation, AFOSI. The incident remains classified. Identity of the alien. The name of the creature involved in the Gate 3 incident was Arcoloid. The alien was described as one of the big-nosed grays. It was a 5 foot 6" tall gray or tan being with large black slanted eyes and a mushroom-like head with 4 long fingers. They have yellow eyes with vertical pupils and very large beak noses. They are genetically engineered by the Ebens, cloned, and were given to the U.S. government for observation, experimentation, study by the Ebens. Visitor housing. This particular visitor lived in the bubble officially known as the Clean Sphere, located between level 1 and level 2 of the 8-level S2 facility at Area 51. If memory serves me right, there were 12 to 15 compartments within the Clean Sphere, or bubble, which was located in the southern end of the S2 facility. Both the Arcoloid and J-Rod, who lived in 2 of the 12 to 15 compartments marked visitor containment, what we speculate is that because the Arcoloid had to live its primary existence in the Clean Sphere, and we could only spend a minimal amount of time in our atmosphere, that overexposure to our atmosphere somehow affected its sanity and intellect. Furthermore, it caused the creature to become delusional, disoriented, and to lose its mental faculties for sound reasoning, analysis, and judgment. In street parlance, it lost its mind, or was of unsound mind, which accounts for his escape from the high-security Clean Sphere facility and the resulting homicide of the security guard. Moderator's note: only the following section was written by a confidential source within the Defense Intelligence Agency and is a concurrent sitting member of the DIA-6. He appears to have a different take on the cause of the visitor's aberrant, dysfunctional, frenzied, and near hysterical behavior. Visitor supplementary background information. This particular visitor was suffering from a mental/emotional condition. Consider the following. This creature came to this planet from another solar system, traveled about 38 light years, was locked up in a special containment housing complex, was shocked by our civilization and our culture, was not allowed to leave, was under strict compliance controls, metal straps that shocked the creature when it tried to leave or did not comply with our instructions, and was unable to communicate in our language. It was probably suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. My overall assessment is I see no reason not to believe the report that was given is accurate. Given my knowledge of how the military works, everything mentioned in this is extremely believable. Add to that, the bigger fear from the military and government would be the dangers of the news of this getting out. More because of people panicking, as well as the chaos that could result in our society. The reaction of the religious would no doubt be a major driving factor in the need to keep information of this nature top secret. There is no explanation given regarding what went wrong with the exchange program, other than that it was to be a 10-year mission and they left in 1965 and only 8 returned in 1978, which was 13 years later, not the 10 of the mission. Given the lack of information about this, there is no way for us to know how the 2 that died on Serpo died, or why the 2 of the 12 that decided to stay there and not return with the rest. The only ones that could answer these questions were the 8 that returned. But as this stated, the last of them died in 2002. I'm not surprised that those that returned were kept in a military base for 6 years after this mission. I have no doubt that they would have been having multiple debriefings regarding what happened on planet Serpo, as well as the experiences they had. The military would have wanted to make sure that all of the personnel that returned were fully able to adjust back to life on Earth before releasing them, as well as to make sure all of them were fully aware of the top secret nature of what they experienced. What I also wonder if it was part of the problem was the fact that they couldn't really get dates and so forth right between the EBs and us. That time frame seemed to be a bit of a contention. That maybe that is the explanation for the 3 years longer than the mission was supposed to be. I don't know. Having been in the military, I know those involved, both human and alien, would have been well taken care of. The military has a very rigid 3 meals a day system, and the food is actually extremely good. The military would have been very careful when realizing a possible food allergy. Regarding the Gate 3 incident, I have a good idea of what would have gone on when that alien escaped. It is called a complete lockdown of the base. No one would have been allowed to enter or leave until the situation was resolved. In cases like this, the military is very quick to lock down a base, but it is very slow to release the lockdown. They want to make absolutely certain that the situation is fully resolved, and anyone needing to be contained is contained. Now, my assessment of the CBE, or cloned biological entity, and what happened with him, I know from what you've heard, combined with my knowledge of the military as well as the empathy I have, I will break this down so it's easy to follow my logic. Number 1. Imagine the situation was reversed, and you are the alien on a planet you never saw before, with a society you never knew existed, and beings that look very different from you. Number 2. Add to that the inability to communicate with your captors, as you can't speak their language, and don't know any way to communicate with them. Number 3. Then imagine your captors are really fucking stupid and put a shock collar on you that would shock you if you tried to leave or if you didn't do what they wanted. But remember, you can't communicate with them to let them know you don't understand. The aspect of the shock collar is something I would have raised hell about if I had been in the military uniform with the alien. I would have been yelling at anyone I could. Whose stupid idea was the shock collar idea? As this by itself could be enough to push someone over the edge, directly leading into feeling as if they must fight for their life. This wouldn't decrease the chances of a violent reaction, but the reverse. It would make a violent confrontation completely predictable. If only one guard was killed, I would say the military got off lightly with this one. I also see that one death not as the fault of the alien, but rather the fault of the absolute moron that put a shock collar on him. I waited to talk about EBE number 1 last because I didn't want to end this with a rant on the sheer stupidity of the practice that was done that I feel made the situation 1,000 times worse than it needed to be. I had heard about EBE-1's report from other sources like Bill Cooper. The big takeaway from this is how he and all aliens are mortals like us. This means the Christian idea that they are demons is simply their own ignorant bias with no basis in fact. I had heard, and I can fully understand, when EBE number 1 was sick, that the government was in a panic to try and save him as well as to get a message to his people about his condition. The idea being that if he died in our care, that it could greatly hurt relations with this alien race. All those in government would have known is how they would have felt if the situation was reversed. Because we have a lot of fears regarding death, it is logical to think that those in government would have thought an alien race could have the same reaction we would. I'm not surprised to hear that EBE number 1's handler became very close. It also seems likely that the handler would have suggested an exchange of personnel because of how much we could learn from their culture from such a mission. Sure, it would mean that our people would be the aliens on an alien world, probably poked and prodded by them to learn about us. But the amount that could be learned from such a mission would far outweigh the discomfort those that went through it may have felt. I'm also certain that all the details about the mission were explained in the vetting process of those involved. Bear in mind, they left Earth in 1965. I have no doubt that the possible religious views of those involved was taken into account during the vetting process. What comes to mind with this was the big interest that the doctor had that medically cleared me in 2009. He had read the report I wrote and only briefly mentioned it. What he was more interested in was my account of my missing time and what I remembered. I told him about that, and he remarked about the detail of my memories and how that could be a threat to some people. At no point did I get the impression that he didn't believe me. In fact, he accepted my memories far easier than anyone else I had mentioned it to. I have no doubt that he knew far more about the alien subject than I had known at the time. In fact, it is entirely possible that the military selected him to be the one to interview me to determine if I was telling the truth or simply delusional. For me, there isn't a matter of not believing this report. My knowledge of the military and basic psychology is enough to confirm that yes, this is entirely plausible. Feel free to leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section. Talk to you later, people.